Jan here, also known as Star Dancer. Thought I'd show you how I make my mask. Whole purpose of these is to protect the other person from anything I might have. So if you wear one, you're protecting me from anything you might have. And for those of us with compromised immune systems, tender lungs, it's really important that you protect us so that we don't get really sick. Anyway, this is a pretty easy to do mask. I kind of took the best of everything, so a beginning sewer can do this. And the other cool thing about it is, as is, without anything inside the filter pocket, you can't smell anything hardly. I went down the coffee aisle in the grocery store the other day, couldn't even smell the coffee. So that was pretty awesome. Anyway, I did the best I could with the video, had a few glitches. Please bear with and have fun. This first step is really, really important. You really need to wash your fabric before you're cutting or you're sewing anything. You need it to shrink. Don't use fabric sheets because it'll prevent the interfacing or your glue from sticking if that's what you end up using. The materials you're going to need are a piece of fabric cut 9 by 16. Cotton is preferred. 4 strips of the same fabric, approximately 1.5 inches wide by 18 inches long, or 4 pieces of the double folded bias tape, 18 inches long. Those are to make the ties. You also need something to go in between the fabric, and fusible interfacing is cut at 8 inches by 15 inches. But if you don't have fusible interfacing, you can use another kind of cloth. You can use any kind of a non-woven interfacing. And if you're using light interfacing, you're going to want 2 pieces. If you don't have the fusible, you also need some fabric glue, but you're only going to attach the corners down. You also need a pipe cleaner or thin wire cut 4 inches long, needle nose or round tip pliers. That's to turn the ends of the pipe cleaner down. A ruler, not plastic because it'll melt. Scissors or wheel cutter, obviously, to cut your fabric with. And these aren't shown, but you need a chopstick or a knitting needle, and that's to hold the fabric so you don't burn your fingers. And 4 small binder clips, and that's because you do not want to use pins. If you're making fabric ties, I'm showing you how to iron it. First, you're going to iron the fabric in half. Then you're going to open it up. You'll iron the ends to the fold, and you just want the edge of the fabric to tip the fold. And here's where this chopstick or knitting needle comes in handy because the iron's hot. So again, you're going to just iron it lengthwise down to the fold, do both sides. You don't want the fabric to overlap, you just want it to touch. So again, the chopstick comes in handy for this part. And then once you're done with that, you're going to fold it in half again and iron it really good. The more you iron, especially if you're using 100% cotton, which you should be, it will actually hold its shape and not need to be pinned. Just a little bit of a pressure from your finger will hold it as it goes through the sewing machine. Don't be afraid to turn it over and iron it several times. Know that at this point it gets really hot though, so the fabric will be hot. Now you want to fold the ends in so you're not having any raw edges. And again, the chopstick will come in handy for this part. Do that on both sides and always fold it back together, fold it in half again so that that main center fold is what's holding everything down. If you're doing bias tape, I have instructions at the end of this that show how to do the bias tape. All right, once you've ironed all your 4 pieces, you're going to take them to the sewing machine, and you're literally just going to sew them right down the middle because you're going to get all 3 thicknesses by doing that. And you can just put them in one after another. It helps to tug the one that's behind to get that end to go through. And again, you can use the chopstick so you can get really close to the foot without worrying about, running your finger through the needle there. And you can see no pins are needed because I ironed it really, really good. And when you're done, clip them all apart. Iron the edges of the fabric down, and you do the long sides first. And I forgot to turn the video on, so I actually ironed the one side down already. And again, just eyeball it. It just doesn't need to be more than 1/4 of an inch. Bringing it down, you're just getting rid of that raw edge. Again, use the chopstick because that iron's hot, and this way you can get that end down really, really good. Then the rest of the fabric just kind of follows along. That makes it easier. The bottom is going to be 1/4 inch. but the top needs to be wider than the other 3 sides and basically a 1/2 inch. And this is because the pipe cleaner is going in there and you need room for it. So there you go. You've got it all ironed and ready to go. Now we're going to add the interfacing. And fusible interfacing, if you've lost your sheet, the rough side has the glue, so that's the side you want facing the fabric. You basically just want to center it in your fabric and then fold the edges down. And if you don't have a fusible fabric, just put tiny dots of glue in the corners, and that's all you're going to need, because again, the fabric and where we're sewing is going to hold it in place once it's all together. Ironing both sides again just makes those folds stay firm. So you can see I have no pins and they're not opening up or anything. You also want to fold it in half and just iron it, and that's to help you with the sewing part of it. That is not actually where the bottom of the mask is going to be. Okay, we're going to put the pipe cleaner in next, and it's going to go in that extra wide fold that we made, but first we want to turn those ends around. So you can either use the round nose or the flat nose needle nose pliers. Make sure you're working on the very, very tip of the needle nose, not the fat part of it, because you want to just a little tiny under and then flatten it, a little tiny under and flatten it, and that's just so it doesn't prick out through the fabric and stab you in the face. When you first put this in, you want it as close to the fold as possible. So on each side of where the pipe cleaner ends, so that's why I'm putting the binder clips there, so I know where that is. So the inside of that binder clip, where they both face each other, is where the pipe cleaner ends, and that's actually where I'm going to sew a stitch. And that's just going to prevent the pipe cleaner from sliding side to side. Back stitch a couple times in that spot. Of course, you can see I took the binder clip off, and then you come around and do the other. Right there, I should have turned the fabric and sewn that open edge down, but I forgot to do it. So at the end of this video, I show you how to sew that spot down, but you literally can sew down to the other pipe cleaner, take the clip off, and then sew the other side edge, but I forgot to do that, so we get to do it the hard way. Be sure you're past the pipe cleaner when you do this, because otherwise your needle will hit the wire and probably break on you. I kind of blew it there. I didn't sew that raw edge down. It's a lot easier if you do it that way. Fold your fabric right sides together. Make a mark on each side about 3 inches from the edge, and don't sew between those marks. And you're going to sew lining up the edge of the fabric with the zipper foot and making sure your needle is in the far left position, so not the center position. And then just sew a straight line to the mark, back stitch at the mark, and then lift your needle up, skip over to the next mark, and then sew to the very end of the fabric. And again, using that little chopstick kind of helps you keep an eye of where that mark is and holds that fabric down if you're a little bit nervous about not having pins. You can use that to help out. So here you go, lift the needle up and then just scoot on over to the mark, line up with the edge of the foot. You can see I was having trouble getting the edges to line up perfectly, but don't worry about perfect. You're not selling these, so they do not have to be perfect, and they're not going to be perfect, but they're going to be very functional, and that's the important part, is that they do what they're supposed to do, and they're going to do what they're supposed to do. Like I said, this is a really good project for beginner sewers because it's really forgiving, and you just basically are sewing a lot of straight lines. You can see there's the pocket. The next step is to finger flatten or open up the seam, and you do that after you turn the fabric right side out. So right now you have a tube, and you're going to flatten the seam with your fingers, find where that pipe cleaner is, and roll that up to the top. That's where your fold is going to be, and that's going to become the top. So you're going to have the fold of the fabric, the pipe cleaner, and then the opening, and then the rest of the mask. This is where I was saying that the seam is not the top of the mask, and that original fold that you did is not the bottom of the mask. It's just there to help you sew those sides together. You can see the pipe cleaner's at the top, and the pocket's there, and the seam is right below the very top. You can clip the side if you want, but you don't have to. Sew along the top side first. This is the side with the pipe cleaner, and you're going to want to be very close to the edge of that fold, otherwise your needle's going to hit the pipe cleaner and you don't want to sew through the wire. I accidentally forgot to turn the video on, so you don't see this part, but you'll see the stitching. Typically you would leave your needle in on the corner, just turn and then sew down the sides and do that for all the corners, but because I'd already sewn it without recording it, I'm starting basically over on the one side. Here we go. It helps with the ties if you put the seam part towards the bottom. However, you'll see I forgot to do that when I turned it around. I actually put the seam towards me instead of up towards the bottom. Remember, when you flip it over, you're going backwards. You don't want the ties at the very bottom and at the very top. You want them a little bit in, and about your pinky's width is a good place. That makes it fit tighter against the side of your mouth. This next part is the pleating part, and I always tell people, make sure you start with a brand new needle. I didn't, and I have been doing a lot of sewing the past week or two trying to figure this out. So here's what happens when you don't have a sharp needle in your machine. You want your pleats to end up between the ties. This is my ruler method for making pleats, and I did a whole video for you guys on just that, so you can watch it. I will link it to the video when I get this posted, so you'll know exactly where to go to find it. Now you can see from this, my ties on the top are a little bit too low. I probably should have sewn them a little closer up, but I was concentrating more on getting this done for you. Make sure you take your clips off before you're sewing, because if you ironed really well, the pleats are going to hold. Yep, right there where it hit all 4 thicknesses of fabric plus the tie, bam, it broke. New needle, starting over at the top. Move your ties out of the way. They're already sewn down, so you don't have to worry about that. Just make sure they're out of the way. And you can even hear it just sounds so much better with a brand new needle. So get the other side done. I use the chopstick for that part because the pleats are popping up, and that makes sure the pleat gets under the foot. This is the most important part. Iron the heck out of it, and if you do this step, it will last through the wash, and you just have to press it with the iron when you're done. You're going to want to put the wire on the top of your face, bend it around your nose first, tie the top over the ears, and then open those pleats up. The bottom goes under your chin, and then tie your back ties. There you go. Like I said, this is a pretty good without putting anything in the pocket, and I have allergies to coffee and fragrances, and like I said, I couldn't smell any of that in the store. This is not for the hospitals. They have very specific requirements. This is not for mass producing. This is for your family and friends. It's a little bit more time consuming than a lot of what you see on the internet. Here's those extra videos I promised you. Here's the problem with if you forgot to sew that raw edge down, you have to actually go and iron that seam open so it stays open for you, and then open it up and go in and sew just that raw edge down. Again, have your needle all the way over to the left so that it does, and make sure your pipe cleaner is pushed all the way to the fold before you do this. And then when you're done, you're going to have to push the pipe cleaner back down towards the stitching so that when you do the top stitch, when you're right side out, you can catch that top edge without catching the pipe cleaner. Don't sew into that pocket where they're sewn together. Stop a little before. Okay, using bias tape instead of fabric ties, it's basically the same process, except you don't have to do all the folding. You just got to fold the ends down. And again, the chopstick comes in, or your knitting needle comes in really handy with this, just holding that little tiny piece of fabric down until you get the iron on it. And if you hit it right in the middle, it usually stays pretty good. Just iron it down and then fold it back up and iron it again. And you want to do that on both the sides. And I didn't show the sewing part of this, but basically it's the same thing. You've got it folded like this, and you just run your seam right down the center. and that'll hold it together just fine for you and works really, really well. The ties are a little bit thinner than the ones we make. It's a slicker fabric. People think it's more comfortable. You can also use grosgrain ribbon for the ties, but I like them to match, so I've been using the same fabric. But I just wanted to show you this in case you have, like I have tons of this double folded bias tape laying around for projects I didn't complete, but now they're coming to a good use.